Do you want to wow your friends this Halloween? Are your Halloween builds not really that scary? Well, in this video, not only am I going to show you how to build something like this, but also how to improve all of your Minecraft builds in the future. So by the end of this video, you should be a much better builder. Now, this video is not going to be a block for block how to build this house. If you do want to build it block for block, this video should give you enough to be able to do that. However, I want you to be able to build your own haunted house, and to know exactly what you need to make it as good as you can get it. Now, just to start off, I'm going to go through a few key things that will help to make your haunted house really good. And after that, I'll go through a step-by-step process of what things to add at what point to make it as easy as possible to build and to get it to look as good as it can. Now, the main thing a haunted house needs to be is grand. And now I don't necessarily mean big, but I mean grand. And some ways to do that is to have it all centered around the middle. Most traditional haunted houses will have this centerpiece here, and that just makes sure all the attention's sent to the middle. Now this is only 30 blocks tall, which is big, but I've done things to make it look even bigger, such as this staircase going up, so the house sort of looms over you and makes it look really intimidating. Also, having these jutters out and sections of it makes it look even bigger. And having smaller windows like this alongside your bigger windows makes it look like there's a lot more room inside than there actually is. Another thing that will help is to have these windows that jutter out as well, in order just to give it a bit more depth. Now, before you actually build your haunted house, you need to know what biome to build it in. I've gone with a swamp mainly because of this grass colour, this really dull, murky grass colour. It really fits the aesthetic of the build, and to be honest, if we look back at our original one, it makes the whole environment feel a lot darker, which really fits in with the theme. First thing you actually want to do is just build out the rough shape of what it's going to be. I recommend having a 1 block centre, so make sure there's an odd number of blocks along here. Now the house will look a lot better if this front section is bigger than the side section here, and this will basically draw everything to the centre. And a rectangular house is a lot better than a pure square house. Now don't worry if you actually run into any terrain, that's fine, because if you actually, I'll show you over here, because the way I've designed the base, when it actually approaches other land and stuff, it really doesn't matter. You can actually just build over it and just texture it around. So actually, even if I had to build it over here, as long as the base is big enough, it really won't make a difference. Then you sort of want to work out the height of the base. I recommend not having it too high because you don't want the house sort of getting lost behind it. So a few, like 4 or 5 blocks is alright. Now you don't actually have to build frames if you don't want, but I find it's really helpful to actually see the sort of sizes of the house, and to make sure it's not actually going to be too big or the sizes are right, because if you don't build a frame and you work out later on that the front's way too big, you're going to have to get rid of the whole thing. Whereas if you've just done a base, you can look at it and go, right, okay, I'll make this a bit smaller, and it takes a lot less time to change. So if you then come a few blocks in, this will be the main structure. I'll leave a couple of blocks in between, just to give enough walkway around the edges. Now the tower can be in the centre, but if it's off to the side that works too, as long as it is still really big and really imposing, with the same amount of blocks on either side. And then you can go back, you can sort of think, right, okay, is this big enough? And most of the time will be no. And for this one it's a no, so let's just extend it a couple of blocks out, see how that looks. That's better, yeah, that's probably about right actually. So you want it to be roughly about the same size as each sort of side bit here, but it doesn't matter if it's not the same. Try not to make it too wide, if anything it needs to be a bit smaller. Now the tower in the middle does work better if it is square. So if you just count how many blocks across it is and count that back as well. So now I'm actually looking at this base, I can see that it's a bit big. For how wide we've actually got the house, it does go past the centre point, which will sort of overpower the rest of the house. So since we've done the frame, we can actually just bring it in a block, which does mean we need to get rid of a block here as well. Ah yeah, and that looks a lot better already. Now when you're actually working out the height, you want to have a rough idea of how big each floor is going to be. So this house here, each floor is 7 blocks high with a gap in between, and that just makes sure that the big windows can actually fit in and there's enough detail there to make it look a lot better. So with that in mind, you can then count up. So if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or however many you're going to use. Now you can change it after, do remember this. So if you go 7 and you think this is a bit big, You can always bring that down, or if you think it's a bit small, you can change it as well. And so this is going to be the height of the exterior walls, and the tower frame you want to make a little bit higher. Now for these frame blocks, you can literally use whatever you want. I'm just using this because it's really easy to see. But if you want to use dirt, you can. If you want to use the wood you're actually going to build the walls out of, that is fine as well. Probably saves a bit of time. Now before you actually start placing any blocks, you want to work out what sort of gradient you want and how you want the actual build to look. Now obviously, if you build it with those blocks, you don't have to stick to it. If you think something else would work better, then that's fine. If you're on creative though, I recommend going in the creative inventory and just picking one block for each different section. So we've got the base, I'm going to use deep slate, cobbled deep slate. For the main house, I'll use spruce planks, and then for the roof I'll just use warped planks. From there you actually want to just work out what sort of blocks go well with this, and this will be very useful later when you're actually trying to texture the building. Now I recommend finding as many blocks as possible which fit and which go well, just so you've got as much option as you can, and then actually when you look at the space you've actually got, you think, right, okay, that's too many blocks. Then you can bring it down a level and just make sure that there aren't too many blocks, because you can have too much variation. Again, don't worry too much about it. It doesn't matter if the blocks don't fit that well, but as long as you have your main 3 blocks, and so you just find other blocks that fit in and go well with that. As I said, it doesn't have to be this many. You can have like just 2 or 3 blocks if you want, but it just means you can have a lot of variation. And it means that when you actually start building it and texturing it, you can just literally come back to this and go, right, I'll use some of this. Now from there, you want to just focus on the house and start filling in all the space of the main house. Don't worry about the base or the roof yet, that will be something we tackle later. Now when you're done, it should look something like this. You've got your big tower in the centre and the big walls outside. It won't look good. So don't worry, it's not meant to look good yet. This is just the shape of it. So what you want to do next is actually think of your roof. Now what I did is I went online and looked at images of haunted houses, and most of them had a very, very almost vertical roof. And so to actually make it look a lot better, you will actually want a frame around the edge. This just gives the house an overhang, and it actually makes it look a lot better because you've got a lot more variation and it's a lot less 2D, a lot less square. And the last thing you want is for it to be very, very square. So from there you actually want to start thinking about your windows first. This is just so you don't build the whole roof and then realise you've got to change it because the windows don't fit. Depending on how big this is, you want about 2 or 3 along each side here. I'm just going to stick with 2. So when you're actually doing the windows, you want to have a look at where each floor starts, and then 1 block above that is probably where you want the windows. This just gives you enough room above and below to have as much detail as possible within the small space. So once you've set out the heights of the windows and where they're actually going to go, you can start working on the roof. And if you want a normal slanted roof like this, you can just go up in stairs. However, if you want it a lot less slanted and a lot more vertical, then I recommend going up 1 block and a stair, 1 block and a stair, a few times until you've got roughly the right height. A lot of it for me actually depends on how much of this tower you can actually see. So once you've worked out the slope, you want to just bring it round all the way, and I'd actually recommend leaving this space just to make the roof look a bit better. Now from there are actually a few things you could do if you want, like I have there. You could put a trim around here, and I think that just frames the roof quite well, and it divides the roof up a bit rather than having it as 1 block. If you don't want that though, I recommend just having a tiny little difference on the edge here. For example, if it goes straight up, then instead of having the corners meet like this, just have this blank to make it look like different sections rather than 1 big blob. So now I can actually see from there, this roof goes up really, really close to the top of the tower. And so I can just extend this up a little bit just to give it a bit more height and just to separate it from the rest of the building a little bit more than it is. And that's why doing the roof this early actually helps a lot, because you can sort of get a good idea of what the finished product is going to look like. Now, as I've done on this side, I've just cut out all the holes for the windows, and I recommend doing the exact same thing here so it looks identical, because you want the front of the house to be perfectly symmetrical with each other, as these sort of houses were exactly like that. As it was quite common for these well, the sort of houses haunted houses are based off to be like that. Now obviously in the middle you'll want your door, so you can just pop a hole in for that, and you'll probably want a big feature window here and / or a big feature window here. You'll definitely want at least one of them. Now once you've actually decided the height of the tower, you can just put a ring around it just like we did on the other one. It doesn't have to be 2 blocks out, you can have it smaller if you want, but it just frames it quite well as like a witch's hat. Again, you can have this any sort of size you want, any angle, but by having it a lot more vertical it just gives the house a lot more height and really makes it look a lot grander. Now once that's done, we can actually start putting in all the windows. Now you can do whatever design you want, but I'm going to stick to pretty much the same design for most of my windows, and that'll be the same one I did over there. I'll show you how to do it if you want to do that, but if you want to come up with your own design, then that's brilliant. I highly recommend actually experimenting a little bit. You can take some ideas of this design as well and change them round. Really make it your own. So this design actually just uses the trapdoors here to make a sort of wall, a really thin wall, so you got a lot more detail within a much smaller space. And I've actually got just shroom lights, and those shroom lights just really light up the house. Now if you want to actually do some interior work and you want that to show from the outside, then just take out the shroom lights, maybe even take out the trapdoors, just pop a bit of glass in there and it'll work pretty much exactly the same way. So now you can sort of see what it's going to look like. And actually for the windows on the level above, you do just want to vary it a little bit. Now that can include stuff like having an extra layer on the outside to make it look a bit bigger, and actually having an overhang like this makes it look a lot bigger, even though the actual window size is exactly the same. I'm going to also add these window shutters as well. Now these match my roof, and if you've got a different coloured roof entirely, say if you've got a crimson roof, then you can just use whatever colour trapdoors you want. I recommend against though using colours that are similar to the actual wall, because they'll just blend in too much and you really want it to stand out. And you can see just by adding these windows how much it improves the whole house. Now though you can start to focus on the centre and actually where all the doors going to go. Now I really struggled to design this. I had to look at quite a lot of images of haunted houses to actually get the design right, and I found it a bit difficult to get the whole thing to look quite gothic. But in the end I found that using slabs and using the trapdoors like this actually worked pretty well. Now I do recommend really playing around with the door design and trying to come up with your own thing, but if you just want to do this exactly, it took me a while to come up with. But if you are coming up with your own design, I'd really recommend having the archways and the gothic style pillars around the doorway, really to emphasise the grandness of the whole thing. Now for this section here, I'm actually going to use 2 tiny windows and 1 fairly decent sized window. And now in real life when they use these, this would all be part of the same window, but there'd be wood dividers between it. And that's basically what these are going to act as. And having a variety of different windows on the whole thing really makes it a lot more realistic. So now at this point I think it's probably about time to work on the base. And what you actually want to do is work out where the front porch area is going to be. Now I recommend it having it just past one of these windows here. Now obviously if you've only got 1 window here, have it just past that. If you've got 7 and you're making a really big house, then just choose one of them and have it just past it. This basically means the pillar that's going to go here won't actually be blocking the window. Now you can come out as far as you want, but I recommend not going too far out because you still want it to be a rectangular shape. So you can build it out like this and then you can think, right, is that the right size? So if you stand up here and think, right, okay, this is the door, there'll be a roof over. So actually, looking at that, I'll actually extend it to the next window. So if you stand fairly far out, you can actually look at it, sort of envision what it's going to look like with the whole base there. And yeah, I think that's about the right size. Now I recommend having another porch area on one of the side faces as well. This really can be as big as you want it. As long as it's a rectangle and as long as it's smaller than the front porch, you'll be fine. Now of course you don't have to have a base, you can just have this on the ground. But if that is the case, you'll still need to actually decorate around the base of the whole building. So now you can actually start filling in all these variant blocks that you'd prepared before around the edge. I recommend having a random mix from here to here all the way around. I also recommend not making it too flat either. If you have a look at the one I did over here, you'll see that I actually, oh, I'll break it. The bottom 2 blocks are actually a block out of the rest, and this just makes it look even bigger, and it really triangles everything up to the center a lot more and makes it feel a lot more real. So how I actually recommend you vary the blocks is that you build it up each time you go round. So like for this section here, I'll have some basalt here, and then I might change that to some deep slate, have some bricks there, and then just work off this way. So for example, I'm thinking, right, there's bricks there, so I'll put bricks here, and then vary it upwards like that, and then I'm like, well, I've had a couple of bits of basalt there, so I'll just vary that round like that. And then if you see something that doesn't look quite right, so like you've got that and you're like, yeah, no, that's not right, then you can just break stuff, change it round, so that is fine. So as you see, I'm just going up layer by layer, and so actually I end up with sort of this wavy sort of pattern. Actually, that's a bit too regular. So you see, you don't want it to be regular, like exactly the same, but if we look at the front here, if you don't look at it too much, it just sort of all blends together. Now we will be using this technique for the roof and a little bit for the walls, but just to keep things simpler, that won't be till later on. So actually, once the base is done, there is another gradient or block group that you might want to choose. Now, you can choose whatever blocks you want for the floor here, but what I'm going to go with, as I did over here, is with the black stone, because the contrast of the black stone to the deep slate and all the grey blocks is really, really cool. So there isn't actually a gradient as much, but these are the blocks I used to build the base. And so just to start, you might want to fill all of this in, just in order for you to actually get a floor in. So already that is so much better than it was. So the next step I would recommend is just to tackle this window here. Now there are a few different designs of a window you could go for. You could go for a round window if you want, or you could go for a big square window. To show you an example of the square window, this is what it would look like with that. But for this design, I am just going to use a round one. So I'll actually show you here. I'm just going to completely freestyle this. Hopefully that'll actually give you an opportunity to see how you can actually do that, and how you can actually come up with your own design. So as you can see, I put those just normal blocks around the edge in the colour that I was going to choose. And now I'm just mixing up the blocks that I can in order to get more of a circular shape. So yeah, that's worked pretty well there. But instead of actually having this as the whole window, I'll just replace them with some of these blocks, just to give a little bit of contrast from the outside. So now it really looks like this is the whole window frame. So I'm just going to have a look how this will look if I have it all as the window. Well, it doesn't look bad, but it could be better. So one way I might do this is by actually replacing some of these trapdoors, just to give it a bit of variance. So no, that didn't really work. It's all about finding out what works and what doesn't. So when you're coming up with your own designs for windows and things, you can take existing ideas that you've already seen and things that you know works fairly well, and you can come up with your own unique designs and really just play around with changing them to see what works and what doesn't. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Now the house actually looks pretty good so far. However, there is a key issue, and that is the fact that there is no way to actually get onto this platform here. And from the centre, which we can see from this door, is here. We can actually build a staircase down. Now you can build a staircase straight down like I have in this design, which just comes straight from the centre and it just brings it down, which does centre everything really well. However, if we want a bit more variation, we can actually bring it down slightly and then come off to the side to bring it down. Basically having a split staircase all the way down. And then if you have a very long drop, you could always loop it back round rather than having one big staircase up. Regardless of how you actually build your staircase, it's something that will make your design a lot better, and it really will increase how big the house actually feels, making it look a lot more impressive. So again, texturing as usual, and actually we can remove some of this as we go down. Oh wow, look at that. So for the next step in this build, we just want to find the midpoint here, or roughly, and this is just going to be the roof of the porch. Not only does this make the porch area feel a lot more part of the house, it will actually make the house feel a lot larger in size than it would do without this, really adding to the whole ominous and intimidating feel that you're trying to go with. So already that's making it look a lot better, but actually that feels a little bit low. So there we are, that looks a lot better. Now from there you can actually start to work out what sort of supports you want this to be on. Now there are a few different techniques you can actually use for supports. First one is just having your supports come up like this if you want, with different variations, and then coming back out into the main bit. Alternatively, you could use the walls and fences, work quite well, especially in the nether brick, because there is a variant of both a wall and a fence here, and it just means you can sort of vary it up. So something like that would work, but then you've got to obviously work out if it fits in with the rest of the tone. Emeralds are quite good as well, but if you are doing a haunted house, then it's probably not the best. And so I do recommend going for a trial and error just to see what works and what doesn't. So once you have actually a design that you quite like, having a few of these around on the main points will really make this look a lot better. And if you make sure they all have a very similar spacing between them, then that'll just ensure that it all looks normal. So there we are for mine. I've just used this gradual decrease in diameter for all the blocks and then back from the middle to the top. And it really emphasises the fact that these are pillars and they are keeping up the supports of this roof. Now on my original design I used this little technique here, which is if you have 3 fences that are in between some walls, it can be the same wall if you want, it doesn't have to actually be different, but the fences actually make this really nice pattern. But since I'm not actually using fences here, I'll just use some anvils to make a much more grand looking rail. I do recommend actually experimenting with loads of different things here, so instead of just going for anvils straight away, have a look at how iron would work, have a look at how the fences would work, and just see which one you want to go with. Literally try everything. I mean, even that looks fairly good. Yeah, that does look good. There are so many things you can use that you wouldn't initially think of using. Really try experimenting with loads of different stuff here to see what works and what doesn't. Because that sort of experience will stay with you, and whenever you're building any other stuff, you'll be able to think, I know what might work, I know what might not. And you can improve your builderness. That's not a word, is it? Now the next step I'm going to take is I'm just going to bring this all the way around, keeping it relatively symmetrical. And now we already know what design we're going to use for the balcony, we can actually add it to this one as well. We can also use the exact same technique we used over there to make stairs for this one as well. Something like this would be fine. Now I do recommend having it facing the front so it all drags everything to the front rather than having it as a separate sort of area. And this is how it would be in the actual houses when they were constructed. The same sort of pillar design that you had over there works perfectly, which really creates another sort of section for this bit. Now luckily for us, most of the main parts are actually done now, so we can start actually putting some more detail in. Now I'd actually take this in steps. Now first we can actually texture all these roofs in the similar sections. So for example we can do the main roof at the same time as we do both of the porch roofs. So you can actually see I've laid out all the blocks that I'm going to be using to texture with, just to make sure that they all fit together properly. Now when you actually come to texture it, it can be quite daunting. So I suggest actually breaking it up a little bit. So replace a block every here and there with a different one. Then what we can do is add a bit more variation with the other blocks we chose, and we can always change them back if we feel like they're in the wrong place, so don't worry about anything being too permanent. Now that doesn't look bad, but the more you actually change stuff around, the better it will end up looking. So if we get rid of that for example, and vary it around like that. Now the reason I'm actually replacing some of these stairs with slabs is just to make it look a bit more ruined, and whatever your design of your roof is as well, you can do that. Even if you've just got your traditional roof that goes straight up, you can change some of the stairs for slabs, have a block behind it and then carry it on upwards, and it basically breaks up the roof a little bit more and makes it look a lot older and a lot more worn down. So I'd suggest actually just taking out some of the stairs until you've got a relatively large amount of stairs gone, and then for the remaining stairs obviously just texture them however you want. Now when you're actually texturing, you can think of each of the blocks as if they are a different stage of the block's life. So for example, this dark prismarine may be the original colour of the roof, and eventually that tiling has been worn away just to reveal the planks, which have eventually also worn away into this warped block. And as soon as you start seeing it that way, you can start to actually have a look at the roof, and you can actually start to see it in more context than you could before. So once you're actually happy with how much texturing you've got, adding a few other things in here and there won't hurt, whether it's these trapdoors or whether it's buttons. As long as it's not too regular, it should look pretty good. So the first part of it is actually going to be the most difficult, because you've actually got to think, right, how am I going to vary this? How regular is it going to vary? Is there going to be some blocks that appear more, some blocks that appear less? But once you've got that all sorted and you're happy with it, it starts to become a lot easier. Having blocks that link going in a diagonal pattern is going to be a lot better than going in a horizontal pattern, and it'll make it look a lot more natural as well, which is another tip that you can use for variation. And trust me, it won't look right when you very first do it, but just playing around with it, thinking, right, what looks right, what doesn't, and just changing it round, eventually you'll get to a point where you're like, I like that, and then you move on and do it all again. So you can see I've actually done this bit here, I've textured all this. However, I'm actually going to show you how I did it on this one. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with texturing, if you go around your surface, if you've already filled everything in, and just break a few blocks round here and there, just try not to make them too big clumps, so you don't want anything like that, but small holes like this are fine. If you want in a bigger section, then try and make it a bit more irregular than the other bits. And if there's any big gaps where you haven't actually made a hole, so yeah, that's pretty much mostly alright. So you can then fill this in with your texture blocks. Now, usually what I do is I go all the way around everything with one of the blocks I'm going to use. So in this case, I'm just going around with my dark prismarine and just filling in all the gaps with that. So then I can look back at it and go, right, where are the other holes, so that I could probably put a bit of stuff here. Right, this is a fairly big gap, so I might, with my trapdoors, I might pop one there just to break it up a little bit, but maybe not in the centre actually, because that looks a bit too regular. And then just try and make it go around. You see, that's another thing you've got to try and avoid. Having, like if I had that, that's not texturing, that's just a line of blocks. So you really want to try and avoid having things in a perfect straight line. Having them just one block off is probably best, but try and not make it too regular. Try and mix it up a bit. So that's probably about right. Now there aren't actually any warped wall slabs, and that's a problem because I've only got half a block of space. Now when you're faced with problems like this when you're building, it's always good to come up with creative solutions. In this case, I'm just going to hang some roots off them, so it looks like things have started growing down from the floor above. Now too much of this isn't that good. Yeah, no, there is definitely too much here, but just a few of them would work. Yeah, that looks a lot better. So now that we have textured everything, we can actually start to add a bit more detail onto the roofs. And we can do this by actually adding some windows up here. Now this will make the whole building actually feel a lot bigger, because at the moment it feels like everything's sort of concentrated around here. However, when we actually look at the one I did earlier, you can see that everything is now concentrated about this point here, because we've extended up using the windows. Now we've not actually increased the height of the building. All we're actually doing is making it feel like the room up here is being used a lot more than it was. And there are a million designs for dormer windows on the internet, so any of them would look pretty good, as long as it is relatively small. You'll also want just to tidy this up as well, so how instead of there's a stair here, just make that a full block so it doesn't look out of place. You can put your windows, or as I'm doing, just put the lights up, and you can see already that makes it look a bit bigger. Now actually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to edit the design. That definitely looks better, but it's a bit far along, so actually I'm going to change that again. And this is just a really key thing that happens when you're actually building, is don't try and do everything at once. Just take a step back and see how it looks first, because you do want to make it look as best as you can. So there we are. I'm actually going to leave in me changing all that round, just to show you how when you actually build something, it doesn't have to stay like that. Changing it and editing it round and seeing what works better is a really important part of building. So once you're happy with that, just check the distance away. So actually, yeah, we need to extend it there. And just do the exact same design on this side. Now you can actually have more if you've got quite a wide roof. You can have a couple of windows on each side. But we just want to actually bring everything in. So if you see, we've got 3 windows on the bottom, 2 there, 1 there. Just triangling everything up. There we are. That looks a lot better. Now, however, we are faced with 2 sides which are completely blank. Now you want to work out how you can actually split this up. I recommend having your smaller windows on the bottom as you have the whole way round, and having the bigger windows up here, and maybe actually space these the same as they are from the corner here just to make it symmetrical. And whatever you do on that side, definitely do on this side. And then in between, evenly space them out, so that might be 3. So nope, 3 is too much if we just have 2. And then maybe 1 block off the centre from these, and then 1 in the centre. Now, when you've actually done the holes and actually planned out where the windows are going to go, just take a step back, because this is the stage where you can really easily change things. So if they aren't looking right, then you can just move them around and see what works and what doesn't. I am very happy with the bottom windows though, so I am just going to put them in place and see if it actually makes a difference to how the top ones look. So actually putting them in has changed my mind. I'm going to have a window that is directly centre of the 2, and then directly above them I'll have my dormer windows. And actually playing around with the design a little bit has made me realise this looks quite good, so I'm just going to edit all the windows I have done so far with the updated design. So there we are, that already looks really good, and it actually makes the wall look a lot more interesting than it did. And if you know you're going to have things on that area that are going to potentially change the texture, so for example, if we've got quite a lot going on, we may want to just leave the texturing till after we've built everything. So now actually I've just added that to the top, and I've had an idea. I'm actually going to add them to all the sides. This is another step that will actually make your haunted house look better, and it is literally just seeing what works and what doesn't. Trial and error in builds like this is really important, because if you don't do trial and error, you'll finish building it and then you'll look at it and go, ah, this doesn't look that good. Actually, you know what, I really like that. That looks quite good. It adds an extra dimension to the whole thing. So already this is looking so much better now all those windows are in. And the more you add all these features in, the better it will look. I do recommend having a chimney if you are going to have a haunted house, because it really does sort of break it up a little bit, while everything else is really even. This would have most likely been on one side. And you can see from this one, having the chimney really does set it apart from the rest of the house, and it just gives it that extra layer of dimension, really improving the overall look. Now, it doesn't really matter what you make your chimney out of, as long as it stands out, it's fine. Stone bricks are good, however normal bricks are actually probably good as well. You can use them. They would work well for a chimney. The main thing you don't want to do is just have a big square rectangle go all the way up with some clouds at the top. Just try and have a little bit of detail with it just to make it as interesting as possible. And make sure you've got a fairly regularly sort of triangle pattern, all culminating in a centre point, which will be the actual chimney. Now I'm just going to leave this as it is, but if you do want to texture it, just pick blocks that are very similar in shade. If you look at this one, I've used loads of sort of grey stone variants. But if you're using bricks, obviously you've got the brick block. Terracotta works quite well. Granite also works, and polished granite, and those are, well, there's 4 there at least that work quite well. If you want to, you can try and find more that work, but 4 is more than enough. So I'm just going to have that, and I'm actually going to make this a little bit taller as well, just so it's a lot more prominent from the front of the house. Because while the focal point will be that tower there, having this in the background of it, it will really add to the whole feel of the building. Oh yeah, there we are, that's a lot better. So now there is the very daunting part of the build, which is the back, and we're faced with this really big blank wall with nothing on. But don't worry, because we can just use the same techniques we have before. So once you're done, just take a step back and think, does that look good? I think it does. So now that all the main features are done, you've got all the windows, you've got your porches, your balconies all done, it's now time to start to think about all the other details that are going to be on this build. So what I recommend doing is literally just sitting here and thinking, what will improve this build? No matter how small it seems, even if it's just like putting some anvils here as railings, you'd be surprised how much of a difference it actually makes. So there we are, I think that is about it for most of the features that I'm going to add. A feature you may want to add, which I'm not going to add here, is you may want to just ruin the windows a bit. One way to do this would just be to remove some of the stuff and just have like a barrier going across it and have some of these things missing or open, just to make it look a lot more worn, weathered and broken, if that is the type of haunted house you're going for. And just having them across all the windows would make it look really good. So now we've got most of the other texturing done, we can actually just start doing this down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the whole thing with a specific block. So obviously the polished stairs and the polished block, I'm just going to count them as the same thing. And just replace some blocks with them. So again, after a short while texturing, this is the sort of thing I've got. And I'm just using the same techniques I was talking about earlier. Taking the blocks and just breaking things, putting stuff back, changing things around if they don't look right. And I think it looks pretty good. So now we're on to the actual house, and this will be the last bit of texturing before the entire house is done. But before we actually finish that, I just want to talk to you about other things that will make it look a lot better. Now to start, this big iron gate out the front of the house really does add to it. Now obviously from the gate a little driveway up to the stairs works quite well. But for the grass around it, I've actually textured this as well, added some dead bushes and some wither roses, just to make it a lot more atmospheric. Another thing you might want to add are graves. Now I've just used the different sort of stone colours to make various graves. And actually I've got a little grave plot here. And I've made one as if something's come out of it. And it's those sort of little details that will make the whole house look a lot better. Now another thing that will make your haunted house look really good is dead trees. So this here is one I made, which is why it doesn't actually look that good, because I'm not that great at building custom trees. But it's sort of like a burnt out, old, really dead, rotting tree. And I think the colour really fits into sort of this environment. But if you want a more traditional dead tree, one that has a much better shape, spoiler alert, I didn't make this one. This one is actually made by my girlfriend, and she's done a great job with the shape and everything. And yes, this is a witch hut she made as well, opposite my mansion. Now a key thing for custom trees is not just to use the same sort of blocks, and not actually just to use the solid blocks. You can see here that there's loads of stairs and slabs, even fence gates and posts. This obviously adds a lot of realism to it and makes it look like loads of branches and twigs coming out, because obviously in a real tree not all the branches are going to be the same size. I mean, these don't need to be too detailed, mine aren't, and it really does add to the whole build, but even just having them there makes it feel a lot spookier. Now I'm not actually going to go through how to build an entire custom tree, but I'm just going to sort of go through a few things that might help. So as you can see, the main sort of route follows a single path up to like a midsection here, and from there it actually sprouts out at different levels into a few different branches. Because if you have a thicker trunk, which is definitely advised, you can sort of vary it round. Definitely try not to make it go straight up, and try not to have it the same thickness all the way around. As you can see, obviously, since it's leaning
Make a
this
really
way,
nice transition
it
from
actually
this
follows this, and the use of stairs here, block here to this block. But when we actually get to one of the branches, the only two blocks that are actually connecting it are this block here and this block. And it actually means that the branch can look like it's sort of curving around a little bit more. And for the smaller branches especially, this is a really important thing to use to make it feel a lot more natural. Now obviously I went into a little bit of detail about this before, but using all these fences and the fence gates for twigs coming off the end of the branches is really important. And just using slabs to actually transition from height levels. And if worst comes to the worst and you've made a really rubbish tree and you've got no idea what to do, there are a million tutorials online for how to do it. I'll even link a decent one in the description for you. But finally we are on the last step of the house, and that is actually how we're going to texture this big spruce wall. So if you've not already worked out why there's a barrel here, the opposite side of the barrel has this really nice pattern, and we're also going to use coarse dirt as a sort of natural divide between the wood and nature taking its course. Get it? Course. So as you can see, just having these here really does improve the whole thing. And to add the barrels, what you want to do is just break random blocks around, and then on the inside, if you just place a barrel down so that it's facing you, it just adds a little bit extra. And now on to the final step. Another thing that will really make it look a lot more ruined is just having a few stairs here and there to make it look like planks have fallen out, and already you can see just from that it looks a lot better. Just to see the full effect of that, if we look at the house I did here, you can really see how it looks with all those planks missing, and it really does improve the build. I hope you did enjoy the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, and I really hope that this video taught you a little bit about building, and even if it didn't teach you anything, I hope you've got a really cool haunted house to impress your friends with. I have been Big Dave, thank you for watching.